Alright, this is episode 73 in our Let's Play series for Space Engineer Survival. This might end up being a short episode because I'm just going to do some code reviews. Honestly, I'm a little bit distracted. I'm working on another project right now, as well as, work and kid and dogs and everything in life. But I am going to code review the fixes that I put in for the inventory sorting that we discovered last time, the disassemble mechanism, or the disassembly rather mechanism for the component inventory on the Space Industrial Complex, and the scrolling for the inventory listing, which I don't think I ever actually went over when I put it in, so we'll take a look at that as soon as my game wakes up. So last episode, when we were picking up cargo, I tried to demonstrate, and that's something else that we'll code review, the collect command for the Space Industrial Complex controller that is supposed to pull everything out of connected inventories and sort them appropriately within the Space Industrial Complex inventories. And I'm filling time here while I wait for my game to wake up. Can you tell? But it didn't actually work correctly because it wasn't taking note of additional inventories after the first priority, the highest priority one. Once that one was full, it wasn't bothering to try to stick any overflow into remaining inventories. It was a pretty straightforward bug to find, a little bit less straightforward to fix, but not too bad. Disassembly was a bit of a challenge, and I'll show you why and how we dealt with it. And the scrolling thing was just because I wasn't paying attention when I was writing the code and made a fairly obvious mistake. I'm not entirely sure how the mistake led to the behavior that we saw, but it did what it did, and it works now, so whatever. I'm going to do the disassemble thing first because that's the longest one, and I can explain it a little bit while I'm waiting for this to obey me. There was a time in the past, before I was really into scripting, when you could not control the assembler's queue. The assemblers also, incidentally, when you're actually accessing them through the production menu, has a disassemble all button, but that disassemble all functionality is not available to the scripting API. And also, I'm not entirely sure how discriminate it is. I don't think it's very discriminate at all, most likely, and I don't want it actually disassembling absolutely everything it can get its hands on. I only want it to disassemble stuff that's in component storage on the SIC. So, like, if we dump a bunch of stuff in the welder and tell it to disassemble, I don't want it to disassemble the stuff that I put in the welder. I just want it to disassemble the stuff that's in component storage, which right now is just this container here. But when they added the capability to control the queue, the way you control it is by passing in the definition of what you're trying to build, except it's not actually the objects that you have in the inventory. So you can come in here and you can say, okay, well, these are the objects that I have in my inventory. But if you try to add these object types directly into the queue, they're not recognized because you actually need to use the blueprints. And the blueprints are apparently not actually available in any sort of enumeration that you can access through the scripting API. I don't know if that's planned to be fixed in the future, if it has been fixed already and I just haven't been able to find it because it's not in the API documentation. But in any case, it's not something I was able to find. So what had to be done? I'm going to save the code somewhere. Oh, here. To get a list of the blueprints is I use this code, retrieve and set custom data on the primary assembler to all of the blueprint names. Queue up one of each component before running. So what I did is I turned off the assembler, and then I queued up one of everything. and then I checked the queue and saved all the names out to the custom data of that assembler. So get the production items as a list, get the queue from assembler 0, which is being set up here. Um, this is the whole function here. So this is a list for the assemblers, this is a list for cargo containers, this is basically storage containers in the sort inventory method, it's the same thing. And this is just a list of blueprints that we're going to create each time we come in here, which is only run on the command. So like when you actually run the command, it does that. When you send the command disassemble, it calls disassemble components. So here we're getting all of the assemblers. If it's not connected, return false because we only want to use assemblers actually on the SIC. Cast it to an assembler. If it's not, oh yeah, if it's not in cooperative mode, because our primary assembler is going to be, this is actually a little bit of a problem. Because the way this is working is there's really only one way to disassembly doesn't work in cooperative mode, and trying to divide up our inventory across assemblers is more complicated than I felt like getting into. So I'm taking the secondary assembler, which is the one that's in cooperative mode. So if it's not in cooperative mode, I'm bailing. But if we have 3 assemblers and 2 of them are in cooperative mode, then this is going to return extra assemblers, and that's not exactly what we want to do. But whatever, it's not the case now, so I'll deal with it later. And then it sets the assembler's mode to disassembly and then gets out. Returns true because it's, it wants to put that one in the list after switching it into disassembly mode. So this will actually put multiple assemblers into disassembly mode if we have, 2 of them that are in cooperative mode initially. But yeah, we'll deal with that if we ever add more assemblers on here, which we're not doing at the moment, so I'm not going to worry about it. Now this is where we're getting the storage containers. We're only getting ones that are connected because we want the SIC's inventory. We're only getting ones that have component storage priority. So if there's, it's not going to try to pull components out of the ore storage or the ice storage. It's got to be one that has components stored in it, because there's no point in trying to disassemble components out of something that's not supposed to have components in it. So that's why we're doing that. Now this, and I only ran this the one time, but I preserved the code so that we could look over it. I'll remove this before I actually update the GitHub. Get a list of my production items, get the queue, which gets the queue of items in production, and since we queued up one of everything, it's going to have one of each kind of component that you can possibly build in the assembler, and that's basically all the components that you can build. Resets the custom data to nothing, and then it adds the custom data, going through each production item, adding the custom data, the blueprint ID, and that's what we're looking for, is this blueprint ID, because you don't get the blueprint ID by looking at the actual component type ID. You have to get this blueprint ID, and you can only get that, near as I can tell, out of the assembler when it's actually queued up. So that added all of those to the custom data of the primary assembler, which we're using for disassembling, which is actually assembler 2. Why is this taking so long? I didn't actually change anything. So if we look at that, you can see we've got a nice long list of blueprint definitions. So then we can, at that point, take the items that we're looking at and look for the subtype to be in here somewhere. Now, the reason why we need it to be subtype in here somewhere, because first of all, the type is this MyObjectBuilder blueprint definition, and that's not going to match. Second issue is that the subtype of the actual computer components is just computer, not computer component. Construction component obviously is like that because that's what it is. Detector component as well. But like I think it might actually just be the computer component that does that. But that's enough. Just one that doesn't work is it not working. Oh, I think the girder component also is not labeled that way. Anyway, point is that there's at least 1 or 2 that are not labeled the same way with the subtype. So it's just called girder, it's just called computer. So we want to check and make sure the subtype is contained in this, and then we know we found the right component, because there's no duplicates there, at least not that I've seen so far and have been able to identify an issue with. That's famous last words right there. So that's how we're finding them. We're searching them out. First thing we do, though, when we come in here, is we're going to create a list of blueprints using the actual definition ID. We can just parse that string out of the custom data. So assembler 0 custom data split by new line. That gives us the list, making sure that it's length greater than 0. Make sure that we're not getting like an empty line at the bottom or whatever, because that's not going to parse correctly, and that'd be a problem. So then we add the my definition ID of that blueprint to this list. Now, for each cargo container, get the inventory, find the items in there. For each item in the inventory, the blueprint that we're going to use is from the blueprints list, find where X to string, so the blueprint's definition ID, which is just going to spit back out the string that we parsed to get it in there that we saw in the custom data, contains the item's subtype ID. So the computer is going to find, my blueprint builder or whatever computer component, and it'll get that one, return it back, and then it's going to take the assembler, add it to the queue, everything that we've got. Now, the trick here is that it sets is disassembling to true when it's done, so that when we're coming in later on the regular updates to do the sort inventory, with the assembler in particular, we've got all this stuff that we did last time. If the queue's empty and we're in disassembly mode, then we can clear out the if the queue's empty or we're in disassembly mode, we can clear out the ingot inventory, the input inventory. If the queue's empty or we're in assembly mode, we can clear out the component inventory. But then this part is new, and my game is lagging again. If is disassembling is true, meaning if we set it before in the disassemble thing, and the assembler's queue is empty, and the assembler's in disassembly mode, then we can turn that back off and flip it back into assembly. So if we've already disassembled everything that we told it to disassemble back when we actually ran the command, we did this by running the command, and we're still in disassembly mode, then turn this off and set it back to assembly mode. The reason why this is all here is because if I manually go into disassembly mode to disassemble one or two things, this will not get set, and therefore it will not automatically flip it back into assembly mode and stop it from doing whatever I told it to do. Or if it finishes, disassembling one thing and I still want to disassemble 3 more things afterwards, it's still not going to do that. So that's what that's for. So I guess that's relatively straightforward now that I'm sitting here explaining it, but it was a little bit of work to figure out and get it to behave correctly, and especially that issue with the blueprint IDs and trying to get all of those to the point where they were accessible and usable, because I spent a lot of time just trying to add components and their definitions directly to the assembler, and it's like, yeah, I don't know how to do that. You're not giving me blueprints, you're giving me something else. So that's how that got fixed. Now, the scrolling thing, that was all being done in where display inventory. So this was originally there already. This is just to display the items, formatted item type key, whatever. This is the order by to get it alphabetical, basically. But here we're saying if the cargo count's greater than the max cargo display, and that's something that I worked out just by trial and error with this font size, and it's a constant that's set up on the top. There's actually 18 for what it's worth. I'll show you that in a second if you really want to see it. And the cargo index, which we started off at 0++, is greater than math floor cargo display index. And cargo display index is being incremented by 0.5 each time. So what this was basically going to do is that every 2 ticks, this is going to be this is going to increment by 1. But on the intervening tick, it's going to be, initially 0.5, 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5. When it's whatever 0.5, the math floor is going to bring it back down. So it's going to basically be 0, 0, 1, 1, 2, 2, etc. is what this is going to evaluate to. So as it's looping through, the cargo index here, which gets incremented in each loop through the item in our inventory, the item in our overall inventory, the dictionary that we save of the item type and the amount for everything all over the ship, all over the space industrial complex from scan cargo, which is in the earlier tutorial. I'm not going to review that again now. But as it goes through each one of those, it implements increments the cargo index words, so that it knows how far in it is, and obviously it's going to start at 0, so it's going to show the first one, you know, right away, because 0 is greater than 0. Um, but then as this goes higher, you know, every 2 ticks, this is gonna have to reach a higher threshold to start printing. So after 2 ticks, this is gonna be 1, then this is gonna be 0. It's not gonna show the first item in the list, and it's gonna have more room to show another item at the bottom of the list, and that's basically gonna do the scrolling. Also, if cargo count is less than the max cargo display, then just go ahead because we don't have to worry about it. But what I was doing wrong is I had this code inside the loop, which was a problem because it was incrementing this every time it went through the loop, and it was trying to reset this every time it went through the loop. And like I said, that was a problem. I can't necessarily follow how that was causing the behavior that I saw, but it doesn't really matter. What it comes down to is that this is definitely supposed to be outside of the loop, so this is incremented each tick rather than being incremented for each item in the inventory. So basically, again, we're going up by half each time, so it takes 2 ticks through the program for it to actually increment by 1. And then we just say if the display index has gone over the cargo count minus the max cargo display minus 1, since there's 0 indexed, we have to do the minus 1. And if the amount that we have is um, basically if we've come to the end of the list. The math is kind of escaping trying to explain it right now. Reset it to 0. So for example, okay, yeah, that's what it is. Um, Say we've got 19 items and we're only allowed to show 18 in the thing before it starts overflowing. Um, if the cargo display index gets to 1, that's going to be 1 is greater than or equal to 19 minus 18 minus 1. So it's going to have to get to 2. So it'll scroll the 1, but then when it actually gets to 2, it's going to get reset and go back to the top. So yeah, that's how that works. Now, for the priority thing and the fact that the sorting wasn't working correctly, that is in this sort block inventory method. What we were doing is we were saving the result of this transfer item to, because it returns a Boolean. My assumption, which was incorrect, was that this returned true if it was able to successfully transfer all of the items into the destination inventory. That's not the case. It returns true, near as I can tell, pretty much regardless. Maybe it doesn't return true, it returns false if these inventories aren't actually connected. I don't know. In any case, this was always returning true, and what we were telling it to do, instead of destination inventory is full, is if this was successful, then break. And since this was always technically successful, it was always breaking and it was never going through and looking at the follow-on inventories to try to transfer into there. So what I'm doing now instead of that is I'm relying on is destination inventory full. So if we've transferred stuff into this destination inventory and now it's full, we're going to continue looping through these and try to move stuff into secondary inventories just to make sure that we're actually moving stuff where we're supposed to be moving stuff and using all of the lower priority inventories as well. So as a demonstration of that, assuming that I still have enough stuff in the large cargo ship, and it looks like, oh, it's because I moved it. Let's see, large. Yeah, see, we've got all this uranium in here. So it's not doing anything now because by default the usual sorting doesn't look in here to sort. It does look in here to refine, so it's taking it out of here first now, but it doesn't sort it all into here. On the other hand, if I access the controller and run the collect command, now it's all been moved. And this is a little bit funny because this is a secondary um, ingot inventory, and since this is pretty much entirely full, it will end up sticking some in here. If I just reorder these a little bit, it'll put it back where it belongs. Because it's trying to move uranium in here and getting it full, and then it tries to move the uranium that's getting refined out of the refinery, and it can't fit it in here, so it sticks it in here. Now, on the other hand, if I put the uranium first, then it'll try to move the uranium in here before it tries to move the ore in here, and then it works and cleans it up. And that's something I might try to find a fix for, so it'll do it automatically, but I'm not super duper worried about that. Yeah, so like I said, kind of a quick episode. I don't really have a whole lot else to show off, and I don't really have the concentration or focus, quite honestly, at this particular point in time to try to get too deep into anything else. This is still just shooting it, hasn't shot at anything else. I think we had 6 items on here last time I looked at it. Um, At some point in future episodes, obviously, I will get back to doing more scripting stuff. On the next episode, we'll probably look at maybe putting a menu on the autopilot, because that's got a lot of what we need at this point, as far as being able to um, point itself at a destination, fly towards that destination, and be careful not to smash into anything. So beyond that, really the next point of usefulness is going to be being able to select the waypoints that we want to fly towards, adjust the speed, maybe adjust kind of the padding around, how close we're going to get to our waypoints and how much tolerance is going to be in the collision detection. Um, so I think that's probably going to be the next item that we work on. Following up with that, at some point in the probably relatively distant future, because I'm going to take a break from scripting after that again, as I usually do. We're going to set something up so that when we query various grids or constructs around the world, it will send us back the coordinates of an open connector. So we'll basically be able to say, hey, I want to fly towards relay sat one. So we'll say, hey, relay sat one, where can I dock up? And relay sat one will send us back the position of its connector, and then we will start flying towards that connector. Um, that's obviously going to then introduce the challenge of aligning properly with the connector and doing the docking. So that's going to be an interesting adjustment to make, and that'll be a little bit complicated, I'm sure, particularly because so far we've been orienting the front of the ship. We don't have to worry about, um, orienting different parts of our ship with the connector that or with the waypoint that we're targeting, and being in that alignment when we get there. So we're going to have to take the connector, kind of shoot out a little bit, and get the connector that we've got to line up with the waypoint rather than the remote control block, and getting the rotation of the ship correct so that it's lined up to dock. And maybe I'll even care about the roll. And right now we're not dealing with roll at all, so that'll be an interesting challenge. But that's kind of the long-term plans for scripting. As far as construction stuff goes, we've definitely got more mines to build. We've definitely got improvements that need to be made to the SIC to eventually convert it into a fully fledged large grid ship, because right now it is not that. It is a stationary, um, fixed station. And the way that I have put it together at this point, they're basically, connectors kind of bolted all over the place, and hydrogen tanks in inconvenient locations, and it's just kind of a mess, and it's gonna get worse unless I make a concerted effort to make it better. So that's definitely something that needs to be done. And eventually at some point, obviously, we're gonna want to attach some jump drives to this thing so that it can travel around, and we're not just stuck in a relatively high Earth-like planet orbit. I say orbit, quote unquote. We're not really doing the whole orbit thing, but anyway. So that's going to be another thing that we're going to want to work on. Um, but yeah, that's kind of the plans for the future. Like I said, I think this is a short episode. I'm not sure how short. We'll see that in a second. But subscribe to see all that happen. Likes, comments, and verbal abuse are welcome. Thanks so much for watching. We will see you next time.